This week on Hot Reads, questions along the Chicago Bears offensive line and about the Green Bay Packers defense. And what does Troy Aikman think about concussions in the NFL? Welcome into Hot Reads. I'm Tom Vandervoort with Hall of Fame quarterback Troy Aikman. And Troy, you're going to Chicago this week, get another look at the Bears. And I got to ask you, after watching Jay Cutler run around take 6 sacks last week, Bears fans watched Olin Kreutz on the other side of the line. How concerned should Chicago fans be about their offensive line this week?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of the same story as what happened with Chicago last year. A number of injuries along the offensive line, a lot of shuffling, you know, through the first half of the season a year ago. They were able to stabilize that and then obviously went on to the NFC Championship game. Going into this season, it was an offensive line looking at them that, you know, really looked to be much improved. And then in week 1, they lose their right guard, Lance Lewis, and then last week, they lose their rookie right tackle, Gabe Karimi. So now they're having to shuffle the offensive line again. That's going to be tough. It was tough last week against a pressure defense. This week against a team like the Green Bay Packers. It's going to be challenging for them to try to pull it all together. I think Chicago's got a lot of other issues, though, offensively, besides just the offensive line. I think they've got to try to find some balance, and that would certainly help Jay Cutler, who's got to be pretty sore after the pounding he took last week.
Now, on Green Bay's side of the ball, we know they're 2-0. The offense has looked real sharp, but the defense has given up more points with 57 than any other 2-0 team in football, averaging giving up 476 yards a game, which sometimes is maybe an overrated statistic, yards per game. But should Green Bay Packers fans be concerned about their defense, especially now that Nick Collins is out?
I think you should be, you know, because what happens is, you know, when you go on and you win a world championship, then there's a tendency for teams, and I was a part of this, to then when you go into the next season say, we'll be okay because we're playing with guys who have been there, or we were good last year on that side of the ball. So, yeah, it doesn't look real good here over the first couple of games, but in time, we'll straighten that out. I believe that they will. But as we sit here today going into week 3, I think you've got to be a little bit concerned, especially last week in light of what Cam Newton as a rookie was able to do. I think Dom Capers is certainly one of the best in the NFL, one of the best of all time, but to allow a rookie quarterback to do some of the things that they were able to do last week with some of the big plays, that's a concern. I think the other thing, you know, when you lose a defensive lineman like Cullen Jenkins, who went to the Philadelphia Eagles, a guy who was second on the team in sacks, that's a pretty big loss. So it's not like they have all of their guys back, and then you combine that with the loss of Nick Collins, who's out for the year, and then some other injuries back there. I think it's a little bit of a concern.
All right, let's talk about Tony Romo a little bit. I think we owe it to him to talk about him because we questioned him a little bit last week. The punctured lung doesn't sound like a football injury, man. He comes back from that and leads the Cowboys to victory. They do have some injuries hosting the Redskins this week. How do you look at Romo and the Cowboys team going into this game?
It's a concern. His health's a concern, but they've got some other injuries. Miles Austin and then, of course, Felix Jones. And those guys are integral parts of what they like to do offensively. That's just a big divisional game against a team that's much improved from where they were a year ago. I think if you put on the film of the Washington Redskins, you can't go off of what you saw last season. This team's dramatically improved. They've always given Dallas a tough game in Dallas. They've won a few here in recent years. I think this is going to be a heck of a ball game on Monday night.
Yeah, it should be very interesting. We had another injured quarterback Sunday night, Michael Vick, suffering a concussion on kind of a fluky play. But we've talked about concussions the last few years in the NFL. I know you have some experience with concussions. Can you just talk a little bit about your experience with concussions?
My experience wasn't a lot of fun. You know, I didn't have as many as what probably, you know, people would like to suggest that I've had. But I think the league's grown leaps and bounds. It got on the forefront of everybody's minds, and certainly player safety. And what they did towards the end of my career was all players, they started establishing a baseline test so that when a player experienced a head injury, they could then go back and test him and compare it to something prior. So the younger players that came in starting around 2000, they've benefited from that. I think the attention paid to this by the league has been very positive. The one concern that I have is because they're it is such a hot topic that I find teams less inclined to categorize a head injury as a concussion, because immediately people then want to say, well, you've got to sit out at least one game, and we've seen that. In fact, this week, after Andy Reid came out and said it was a concussion, now the Eagles come out and said, well, it was a mild concussion. Hopeful that he can play, and it looks like that he will. I do believe there's less head injury today than what there's ever been, but I just think that there's more attention paid to it. Years ago when someone had a head injury, they got their bell rung and they came out for a play and they went right back in. You don't see that happening right now. I think that with the improvement of the equipment, we've seen players then use the helmet as a weapon. As we've seen helmets get better in protecting players, we've then seen defensive players use them more to their advantage as far as leading with the crown of their helmet. And there's been some pretty violent hits, and we've certainly seen those. And so, I've often said, it won't ever happen, but I've often said that the only way you're going to really eliminate, head injury, or players at least launching and leading with their head, is to go back to leather helmets. And I don't think that there were near as many head injuries at that time, but obviously that's something that won't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the leather helmet manufacturers would love that, but probably not going to happen. Listen, Troy, thank you. Enjoy the NFC Championship rematch up there in Chicago, and we'll catch up with you next week.
Sounds good. Look forward to it. Thanks, Tom.